One evening, while I was watching one of Dr. Havin's creation seminar videos, and he quoted Genesis 1, 6 through 7, the Holy Spirit illuminated that God created our atmosphere in the midst of the waters and separated the waters from above it from the waters below it. And I realized that our atmosphere used to have a canopy of water surrounding it. Genesis 1, 6 through 7 states, "Then God said, Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. God made the expanse, and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so." The canopy of water caused the entire earth to have a tropical climate, which is substantiated by the fact that palm trees have been discovered under the ice at the poles. Oxygen extracted from fossilized sap, which was taken from the sediments that were deposited by the flood, revealed that prior to the flood the atmospheric pressure was 28 pounds per square inch, as opposed to the present 14 pounds per square inch, and that the oxygen concentration in the atmosphere was double what it is today. The higher atmospheric pressure caused plants that only grow 4 feet today to grow 40 feet prior to the flood. This is substantiated by the large fossilized plants that were found in the flood deposits. Dr. Morey from Japan demonstrated that the higher atmospheric pressure that existed before the flood caused the plants to grow taller when he pressurized carbon dioxide around the stem of a cherry tomato plant and covered it with a plastic shield to protect it from the ultraviolet rays. And after 16 years, the plant grew 40 feet tall and produced over 15,000 softball-sized tomatoes. The greater pressure and concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere and the protection that the canopy of water provided from the ultraviolet rays is the reason that prior to the flood, man lived longer lifespans. We can see the decline in the lifespan of man since the flood in Genesis 5, 3 through 5 and Genesis 11, 24 through 25. Genesis 5, 3 through 5 states, "When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his own likeness according to his image, and named him Seth. Then the days of Adam, after he became the father of Seth, were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died." And Genesis 11, 24 through 25 states, "Nahor lived 29 years, and became the father of Terah. And Nahor lived 119 years after he became the father of Terah, and he had other sons and daughters." Now Genesis 8:2 reveals that the canopy of water dissipated during the flood, which took place in 2350 BC, when it tells us that the floodgates of the sky were closed. Genesis 8:2 states, "Also the fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were closed, and the rain from the sky was restrained." When the canopy of water dissipated, this removed the insulation barrier between our atmosphere and the atmosphere above the canopy, which caused our atmosphere to cool to 32 degrees at the north and south poles. This, coupled with the tropical oceans that were warmed by the subsurface volcanic activity that occurred when God released the waters from the deep, caused a high evaporation rate, and the ice began to build up at the north and south poles. The historical record reveals that the high evaporation rate caused a constant cloud cover and twilight throughout the earth, which allowed the ice to build as far south as the state of Pennsylvania in the United States. Now, a study conducted at Columbia University revealed that the maps that Columbus and other sailors used were made up of smaller component maps that were put together, and that at the time they were drawn, the ice caps had just begun to form. Satellite imagery revealed that the coastlines and rivers, which are presently covered by ice, were accurately drawn on these maps, and this disclosed that those that drew the component maps knew how to navigate and map the Earth at that time. The component maps indicate that the Great Pyramid of Giza was the prime meridian at that time. Now, a yachting instructor in England who began to look into how the ancients were able to sail and map the Earth, constructed a T-square shaped device that when he pointed it at the North Star, it accurately provided his latitudinal position. It was from this revelation that he realized that a similarly shaped device, which he had read about, that was discovered in the Great Pyramid of Giza, was actually the device that the ancient Egyptians used to navigate and map the Earth. However, I would like to point out that this device has nothing to do with the Celtic cross, which the atheists like to call it, but rather it is more accurately called an archimeter. He eventually concluded that after the ancients observed the precession of the zodiac across the horizon with this device for 8 years, they were able to determine the length of one side of the hexagon that the circle of the Earth circumscribes, which is equal to the radius of the Earth. He then realized that once they knew this, they were able to determine the circumference of the Earth, and from this, they were able to determine their longitudinal position through a simple triangulation calculation. James Ninehouse's research revealed that the smaller component maps were drawn shortly after the flood by the children of Sidon in the Bible, who were the Phoenicians. It has been estimated that after the flood, during the time period that the evaporation rate was high, the middle latitudes of the Earth received an average of 40 inches of rain per year. This was substantiated in the USA when they discovered that the ancient shorelines of Salt Lake in Utah, which is 16 feet deep today, revealed that it used to be 450 feet deep. We can see from the paintings on the ancient tombs in Egypt and from Exodus 9:22 that after the flood, during the period of time when the evaporation rate was high, ancient Egypt, which is now desert, was made up of rich farmlands mingled among lakes and rivers. Exodus 9:22 states, "Now the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out your hand toward the sky, that hail may fall on all the land of Egypt, on man and on beast, and on every plant of the field throughout the land of Egypt." Now Numbers 13, 17, and 22 through 24 reveal that during the time that the evaporation rate was high and the ice was building up, the land of Canaan received approximately 40 inches of rain per year and was a fertile land. Numbers 13, 17, and 22 through 24 state, "When Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, he said to them, Go up there into the Negev, then go up into the hill country. When they had gone up into the Negev, they came to Hebron, where Haman and Sheshai and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol, and from there cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. And they carried it on a pole between 2 men, with some of the pomegranates and the figs. Now as the ice built up at the poles, the oceans lowered several hundred feet. And while they were lowered, Noah's descendants built cities along the lowered coastlines. However, when the volcanic activity ceased and the oceans cooled and the evaporation rate lowered, the constant cloud cover lifted and the ice began to melt at the southernmost points, and according to Plato in 1500 BC, during the reigns of the kings Dardanus and Cecrops, the oceans began to rise, and the inhabitants of the coastal cities, including Atlantis, fled and they built new cities on higher ground. Atlantis, which was discovered submerged under the Mediterranean Sea, just off the southern coast of Spain, was reconstructed in Tunisia and was called Carthage, which means new city. The ancient Indians in India also wrote in their Vedic that the Ice Age ended when the Kandamarians, who lived along the southeast coastline of India, fled their kingdom in 1500 BC because the oceans rose. Now the ancient Egyptians also corroborated the date that the Ice Age ended when they wrote in their ancient Venu that the Nile backed up and became blocked by debris when the oceans rose in 1500 BC. In addition to these records, ancient cities have been discovered submerged under the oceans throughout the earth. The reason that the atheists have been lying about Atlantis, telling everyone that it is a mythological place, is because Plato wrote that Atlantis was submerged by the rising oceans during the reigns of Kings Dardanus and Cecrops. and they know that they ruled around 1500 BC. And this flew in the face of their lie that the last ice age ended in 10,000 BC, and that ice ages occur every 100,000 years. The fact that these anti-Christian atheist socialists have taken everything else that Plato has written as fact, except his account of Atlantis, should have tipped everyone off that they are lying about Atlantis in order to cover up their lies about the Ice Age. I would also like to warn people not to fall for the atheist socialist scare tactic that the world is heading for disaster because the ice is melting. Because there were mappers who were mapping the Earth when the ice first began to form, which demonstrates that people were able to survive on the Earth before the ice lines grew as far south as they exist today. The socialists in the Democratic Party and members of Socialist National have added the lie that global warming is man-made to their list of atheist lies, and they are wasting billions of tax dollars propagandizing Americans into believing this anti-Christian lie, which will not change the fact that the ice lines will continue to melt no matter what they do. Now, as the ice melted and the ice lines receded northward, the jet streams moved with them, which caused southwestern United States and ancient Egypt to turn into deserts. Now, as you can see through biblical and other historical records, as well as through archaeological discoveries and fossil evidence, that the awesome fact is that there used to be a canopy of water that surrounded our atmosphere that caused the entire world to have a tropical climate and an oxygen-rich atmosphere that caused man to live longer lifespans. When the flood occurred in 2350 BC and the canopy dissipated, this caused man to live shorter lifespans, and the ice began to build up at the north and south poles. This caused the oceans to lower, and the inhabitants of the earth built cities at the lowered coastlines. During this time period, the middle latitudes received 40 inches of rain per year, which caused ancient Egypt and Canaan to be the lush, fertile lands described in the Bible. In 1500 BC, when the oceans cooled and the cloud cover lifted, the ice melted and the oceans rose, which caused the inhabitants of the coastlines to have to flee their cities and build new cities on higher ground. As the ice lines receded northward, the jet streams moved with them, and this caused places that were once fertile lands to become deserts. As you can see, the historical and archaeological records, as well as the evidences, bear witness that the Bible is true.